everyone, I'm Lily, and I'm super excited to have you here. Welcome to our channel, Easy Peasy English. If you want to learn English the easy way and speak confidently in real life, you're in the right place. Let's get started with Ryan before you go.
Hi guys, I'm Ryan.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
So, if you have ever watched a house being built, you probably know that the most important part of the entire process is also kind of the most boring.
Right, you're talking about pouring the flat, gray concrete foundation.
Exactly. I mean, it is completely unglamorous, but without that basic layer, the complex, beautiful structure you want to build later is just going to collapse right into the mud.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And today, we're actually looking at the linguistic equivalent of pouring that concrete.
Yes, we are. We're doing a deep dive into a transcript from the Mr. English channel on YouTube. It features two instructors named Emily and Paul.
And it's important to note that the material itself is a lesson designed for absolute A1 level beginners who are literally just starting to learn English.
Right, which makes it a really fascinating starting point for us. I mean, considering you, our listener joining us on this deep dive today, are already completely fluent in the language.
Yeah, the house, so to speak, is already fully constructed and decorated for you.
But even so, there is something deeply revealing about pulling up the floorboards to see how that initial foundation is poured. Like watching a language get built from the ground up exposes the hidden mechanisms of how we think.
It really does. And as this source material demonstrates so well, that very first layer of concrete we pour when we learn to communicate is always our daily routine.
Always. And honestly, it is the most analytically sound place to begin.
Because when you strip away all the complexity of a fluent vocabulary and look at Emily and Paul's A1 lesson, you realize it isn't just a random list of survival phrases. It's really a blueprint of how human beings sequence their reality.
Oh, I like that. A blueprint of reality.
Yeah, I mean, we take this massive, continuous stream of a 24-hour period and we break it down into chronological, manageable chunks. The lesson relies heavily on using the physical constraints of our bodies to process new linguistic information.
So let's follow that concept of physical constraints, because that is exactly where the lesson begins. Before we even get into environments or obligations, the source starts with the literal waking moments of the day.
Right, the very first thing you do.
Yeah, and Emily and Paul break this down with a level of granularity that is almost microscopic. For instance, Paul notes that he usually wakes up around 6:30 in the morning.
Which Emily cheerfully calls being an early bird.
Yeah, she does. But what caught my attention isn't the time on the clock. It's the deliberate distinction they make between the act of waking up and the actual physical action of getting out of bed.
That's a great catch.
Right. Emily actually pauses the lesson to emphasize that get out of bed is a critical phrase to master.
And that distinction really highlights a fundamental principle in adult learning. They aren't just teaching the abstract concept of morning. They are anchoring language to very specific motor functions.
But wait, let me just push back on this microscopic focus for a second.
Sure.
When adults decide to learn a new language, their immediate goals are usually, well, highly practical, right? They're externally focused.
Yeah, they want to navigate an international airport or book a hotel room.
Exactly. They want to know how to order a meal at a restaurant. They want high-level communicative utility. So doesn't this hyper-specific focus on telling someone, I am getting out of bed or I am brushing my teeth, actually frustrate an adult learner?
It's a fair question.
I mean, wouldn't it be far more efficient to just teach a blanket phrase like, I get ready for the day, and then move on to the more complex, useful interactions?
Well, the frustration you're describing is totally real. But skipping those micro actions actually guarantees failure.
Wait, guarantees failure. How?
Because teaching an abstract conceptual phrase like getting ready for the day gives the beginner's brain absolutely nothing concrete to hold on to. Getting ready is just a vague notion, you know.
I guess that's true. It looks different for everyone.
Exactly. But a micro action like holding a toothbrush or splashing water on your face, that is a universal, undeniable physical truth. This relies on a concept called embodied cognition.
Okay, meaning the brain learns better when the body is actively involved in the process.
Precisely that. By linking a brand new, totally foreign string of syllables to a tactile action that the learner performs with their own body every single day, the lesson bypasses rote memorization.
Oh, wow. So it creates an immediate physical memory anchor.
Yes. When the learner goes to the sink tomorrow morning and turns on the faucet, their brain triggers the physical memory. And that, in turn, recalls the vocabulary. wash my face.
That makes a ton of sense.
The physical routine literally builds the linguistic routine. You really cannot teach someone to navigate an airport in a new language until their brain trusts its ability to map words to their immediate physical reality.
So we establish those tactile anchors first. The physical morning needs are met through these highly specific verbs. The face is washed, the breakfast is eaten.
And they get very specific about breakfast too, right?
Oh, very specific. Emily outlines her breakfast of coffee, toast, and fruit. She specifically mentions a banana or an apple, while Paul opts for tea and cereal.
And then comes getting dressed.
Right. Putting on clothes, putting on shoes, putting on a coat, and finally leaving the house. Which actually brings us to a major conceptual shift in the source material.
Yes, the transition to the outside world.
Exactly. We are moving away from the internal, highly controlled environment of the home and stepping out into external systems. The vocabulary shifts to reflect the workday.
And notice how the pedagogical strategy evolves right here. Because the physical environment is now dictating a completely different kind of cognitive load.
The vocabulary definitely gets an upgrade. Emily and Paul's routines diverge to introduce different professional environments. Emily goes to a traditional office, so her verbs are tethered to physical objects in that space.
Like sit at my desk or work on my computer.
Right. Meanwhile, Paul works somewhat remotely, so his vocabulary introduces a slightly different sphere. He talks about how he will write articles, prepare lessons, and have online meetings.
It's a distinct shift in complexity.
To use a video game analogy, it honestly feels like the language learner has just advanced past the tutorial level.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
The morning was just the tutorial, press the button to put on your coat. It was purely physical and immediate. But now we're moving from tactile actions like putting on shoes to conceptual tasks like writing reports.
And that pedagogical escalation is entirely intentional. What this section of the source material does is teach the beginner how to categorize an external environment.
Because work environments are fundamentally different from personal spaces.
Exactly, and they are inherently more complex. So to manage that complexity without completely overwhelming the learner, the lesson introduces specialized workplace nouns, like emails, reports, meetings. But it pairs them with incredibly rigid, predictable structural verbs.
Ah, I see. So the complexity of the noun is offset by the simplicity of the verb.
Yes, you answer emails, you write reports, you have meetings.
It's very repetitive.
That linguistic repetition mirrors the structural repetition of a workday itself. Professional environments run on routine, process, and predictable actions.
So the language being taught mimics that exact predictability, which lowers the cognitive load.
Right. The learner doesn't have to worry about creating complex sentence structures. They just have to plug the new nouns into those reliable verbs.
Which brings me to what might actually be my favorite distillation in the entire transcript. During this workday segment, Emily defines the concept of meetings.
Oh, this is a great part.
She doesn't talk about agendas or action items or anything like that. She says, very simply, meetings are when people get together to talk about work.
It strips away all the pretense.
It really does. If you are listening to this right now, maybe on your commute or sitting at your desk, just think about your own calendar for a second. Think about how complex and fraught corporate meetings can be. Oh, the politics, the endless slide decks, the industry jargon.
Exactly. But stripped down to its A1 foundation, a meeting is just people getting together to talk about work.
Yeah.
It is remarkably clarifying. It demystifies the whole environment.
And demystifying the environment is the core function of A1 vocabulary. If you introduce corporate nuance too early, the language becomes a barrier rather than a bridge.
Right, they need to stick to the basics.
Yeah.
By the way, Paul mentions lunch during this workday section too.
He does, yeah. He keeps it light, a sandwich or a salad.
Yeah.
And he either brings it from home or goes out to eat before it's, as he says, back to work.
Back to work, exactly. But eventually, the structured workday ends. And we hit a really fascinating conceptual pivot in the lesson.
The transition into the evening unwind.
Yes, which represents the shift from obligation to free will. During the day, the vocabulary is driven by necessity. I have to answer emails. I have to go to meetings.
But the moment work ends, there's a distinct shift in the tone of the transcript. The source literally notes that going home, that's a great feeling. And then we are introduced to variations in evening routines, relaxing on the sofa, watching TV, cooking dinner.
And we get more specific details here. Paul mentions making pasta, or a simple soup, or sometimes trying new recipes.
And the introduction of variation is key here, as are the chores that inevitably follow the dinner.
Right, the chores.
Emily explicitly mentions washing the dishes, and she adds this little commentary. She says, "Not my favorite activity, but it has to be done."
And Paul immediately chimes in to agree with her on that.
He does. And then we get the wind-down options. Reading a book, talking to family and friends. Paul mentions going for a walk because it's good exercise, or listening to relaxing music.
It's all very personal.
But I actually have to ask about this injection of personality. Up until this point, the lesson has been relentlessly focused on utility. Learn the verb, map it to the object, wash face, write email.
Right, very mechanical.
Suddenly, Emily is complaining about washing dishes, and Paul is giving us his opinions on the health benefits of a walk. Why introduce these personal opinions to absolute beginners?
You think it might be distracting?
Well, yeah. Doesn't adding phrases like "not my favorite" just clutter the learning process with unnecessary emotional vocabulary?
Actually, far from cluttering the process, this specific transition is what turns the learner from a machine reciting mechanical actions into a real human being.
Oh, interesting.
Because the biggest crisis an adult faces when learning a new language is an identity crisis.
Wait, an identity crisis? How so?
Well, think about it. As a fluent speaker, your personality is expressed through nuance, humor, preference, all those things.
Sure, you can be yourself.
But when you start an A1 language class, all of that is stripped away. If all you are capable of saying is "I go to work, I eat food, I sleep," you feel incredibly restricted.
Oh, I see. You feel like an infantile version of yourself because you cannot express your inner life.
Exactly. By introducing phrases like "not my favorite activity" or "that's a great feeling," Emily and Paul are handing the beginner a lifeline to their actual adult identity.
They're giving the learner a voice, not just a vocabulary list.
And tying that voice to emotion drastically increases retention. In neuroscience, emotion is essentially the superglue of memory.
The superglue of memory. I love that.
It's true. You are far more likely to remember the structural phrase for "wash the dishes" if your brain associates it with the shared universal annoyance of having to scrub pots after a long day at work.
That makes perfect sense. We remember how things make us feel long after we forget the rote mechanics.
Absolutely. Oh, and we should mention the final bedtime routine they cover.
Right. Rounding out the day, they talk about brushing teeth again, naturally. And then Paul mentions he usually turns in around 10.3 or 11.0, while Emily goes to sleep slightly later, around 11:30.
So they've officially mapped out the entire day.
They have. Having mapped out this entire chronological journey, moving from the physical mechanics of the morning through the structured environment of the workday to the emotional expression of the evening, the deep dive shifts focus.
Yeah, this is where the video changes gears.
At the end of the video, Emily and Paul stop describing their own routines and pivot to explicit instructions for the learner. They do a rapid-fire summary, listing every verb from waking up to going to bed.
But then they focus on the actual pedagogy of practice.
Right. They tell the learner to think about their own day from morning to night and try to say it in English. And they strongly advise writing it down.
And this is where we see the transition from language architecture to the psychology of language acquisition, because the instructions they give are incredibly specific regarding the learner's mindset.
Yes, the psychological support is what really stands out here. They explicitly tell the learner, don't worry if you don't know all the words, just try your best, be patient with yourself, and celebrate your progress no matter how small it seems.
Which is so crucial at that stage.
It reminds me of the mechanics of building muscle memory at the gym.
Oh, how so?
Well, you can stand there all day watching a fitness instructor lift weights with absolutely perfect form. You can study the biomechanics of a bicep curl until you're an expert.
But that won't make you stronger.
Exactly. Until you physically pick up the weight yourself, until you do the reps by writing the vocabulary down and saying it aloud, you aren't going to get any stronger. And crucially, you have to celebrate lifting the 5-pound weight before you can even attempt the 50-pound weight.
That gym analogy perfectly captures the necessity of the repetitions. But the psychological encouragement Emily and Paul offer addresses something even more fundamental in linguistics.
What's that?
It's a concept known as the affective filter.
The affective filter. Let's break that down. What exactly is filtering what?
So the affective filter is a theoretical concept that explains how emotional variables impact learning. Simply put, if an adult learner is anxious, stressed, or terrified of sounding foolish, their affective filter goes up. It acts like a literal brick wall in the brain, blocking new linguistic information from being processed or retained. the stress hormone cortisol spikes, and the memory centers just shut down.
Wow. So feeling overwhelmed or embarrassed isn't just an unpleasant side effect of learning. It actively prevents learning from happening at all.
It is the single biggest obstacle. And the source material recognizes this dynamic brilliantly.
By keeping things simple.
Yes, by breaking the intimidating, mountainous task of learning English down into the simple act of describing what you had for breakfast, they lower the stakes.
That makes a lot of sense.
By framing practice as a highly personal, daily habit where perfection doesn't matter, they lower that effective filter. They make it safe to make mistakes.
Which totally explains why they emphasize writing the routine down. Writing it down removes the pressure of real-time conversation.
Exactly. No one is rushing you.
Right. You don't have someone staring at you waiting for the right verb. It externalizes the thought process, making it tangible and real without the social anxiety of having to speak perfectly on the spot.
It turns an abstract, intimidating goal into concrete, manageable evidence of progress. It is the ultimate low-stakes environment.
So let's pull all of these threads together. We started off talking about pouring a concrete foundation.
The unglamorous part of building the house.
Right. And through this A1 lesson with Emily and Paul, we've seen that language learning isn't really about memorizing a dictionary. It relies on breaking our incredibly complex lives down into universal, highly relatable micro-actions.
We saw how the tactile anchor of splashing water on your face builds motor memory. We saw how the predictable verbs of the workplace reduce cognitive load.
And we saw how the emotional release of complaining about the dishes helps a learner retain their identity. The entire human experience is in this transcript, just distilled into its purest, most basic verbs.
It really is all there.
Which leaves me with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you, our listener. As we established at the beginning, you already have the fully built house.
You're already fluent.
Yes, you possess the complex vocabulary, the industry jargon, the nuanced ways of expressing your ideas. But at the close of their lesson, Emily and Paul give their beginners a homework assignment. Think about your day and try to say it in simple English.
A seemingly simple task with profound implications.
Exactly. So what if you took that challenge? What if you took your current, highly complex, meeting-filled, chaotic daily routine and actively tried to strip away all the jargon, all the corporate speak, all the noise?
That would be quite an exercise.
What if you distilled your own day back down to its absolute simplest A1 level actions? I sit at my desk, I talk to my friends, I go for a walk.
Just the concrete foundation.
Right. Would stripping away all that linguistic complexity change how you actually view the rhythm and purpose of your own day? Sometimes, to really appreciate the house you've built, you have to go down to the basement and take a good long look at the concrete foundation holding it all up. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today.
It has been a fascinating journey exploring the architecture of language with you.
Keep observing the little things, keep questioning the complex things, and we will catch you next time.